Being aggressive is fun, but not everybody is naturally a huge hitter. But that doesn't mean that you can't actually have aggression. In this video, I'm going to show you guys a combination of skills that if you do correctly, can compensate for a lack of natural power. And I'm even going to show you guys a real world example of a player that you might have seen that's actually really effective at this set of skills. Welcome back to the video. Let's get started. Quick side note before we get started, I'm not actually going to be teaching you guys how to do these things. I'll do demonstrations, I'll show you how to apply them, but in terms of the technique that goes into it, you just got to get on court and practice these things because they do take a little bit of work to get the feel for them. With that being said, let's get into the first thing, which is a compact motion. Now, a compact motion just means if you're a type of person who tends to do something like this on the forehand, you're going to want to simplify it into a timing and into a size that is actually easy to execute quickly. Now, the reason why we're going to do this is the more time we can save, the more time we can take away from our opponent inevitably, because we don't need to give ourselves time to execute the things we're doing every shot. Meaning, if I'm trying to get a little closer to my opponent or take their time away, it doesn't help me to need more time on my side of the court. So as you watch me hitting the ball in this clip that you're seeing, the only thing that you should notice as a difference is some of the time I'm using a bigger swing and some of the time I'm using a smaller swing. Now, if we can make the smaller swing the standard, we can go into the next thing that we want to do, which is take the ball early. Now, taking the ball early is a skill that actually takes a lot more practice. Not everybody's good at it, and most people actually end up over-attacking or being too aggressive. So if we go with the small compact swing that you're seeing here, and then we add in the taking the ball early, I'm taking time away from my opponent twice. One for the size of my swing, and then one for the position I have on the court. Now, I'll do a couple of demonstrations now just to show you guys how to work on the details of it, but as you can see from the point play video that I just showed you, it is very easy to make these adjustments and apply pressure to your opponent almost for free. So the first step you're going to need to go through when you're working on actually making your swing compact is understanding how much of your wrist and shoulder you're going to be adjusting. If you're somebody that tends to use a lot of shoulder motion, it's actually kind of tough to get the momentum you need in your shoulder in this tight area. So what you're going to need to do is activate your wrist a little bit or activate your core a little bit to compensate for the momentum that you're losing. So as Emily feeds the ball to me, if I do this, it takes a lot of motion to get that going, and I'm hitting a solid forehand, but I also have to take the time needed to hit that shot. Now, if I switch into this motion here, it's way quicker and easier to execute, and I'm also able to move toward the court. I'm not going to make all of them, but I'm able to move toward the court at the same time. Whereas if I go back to this, you can see naturally I start with a step kind of backwards before I hit the shot. So naturally, just by shortening up that motion, I feel like I should be going forward, even though I'm not really trying consciously to go forward. The smaller the motion is, the more you're going to find yourself just kind of scooting into the court. Combine that with, as I said before, just being more comfortable in this area. You can do this from the back of the court if you want to work on just getting the feeling of smaller setups, but inevitably you're going to want to scoot back in. So Emily, feed me the ball one more time. If I wait like this, you notice that I actually end up lifting the ball a little more because the ball's starting to fall in most cases, even with a smaller setup. Because the ball's dropping, I have to lift the shot up. But if I scoot in, the ball's already on the rise, so I can flatten that ball out like I talked about in the video I did a while ago. If the ball's on the rise, lifting the ball is actually counterproductive because you're going to add extra unnecessary height. So the ball on the rise with a small swing, I don't have to do that much work because the ball's already going to clear the height of the net. Just for the sake of explanation and example, everything I said works over here too. So if I go with this big motion, I naturally start to lift, and then you see that I actually have to create more spin and it eats up more time. If I was to make the motion smaller, right about here, everything takes less time. And I wasn't really thinking about moving, but because I had done this part already, I didn't feel like waiting here. So as the ball comes to me and I just set it tight, going out towards the ball becomes almost second nature without me really trying. And that trajectory drops again. Switching to a one-hander, it's all the same thing. If the ball comes to me and I load way back here, naturally I lift, whereas if I go like this, extending out, I just wish I would stop missing the first one, but extending out into the ball right off the rise, the ball's natural trajectory stays low. So for my one-handers who are used to having momentum with all this, you're just gonna need to put more tension in your left hand and kind of release it all at once. With the two-hander, again, bring it from the core, rotate into it, do less work with the hands. If you're a handsy player, just try to get your left leg stable if you're right-handed and just rotate through and take it early. So we've covered two of the main skills that you need in order to be offensive without really crushing the ball. But this third one is something that kind of flies under the radar, and only certain players do it naturally, but anybody can learn to do it. We take the first thing where we have that motion set really small and we look to take the ball early. But this other thing that we're going to do is we're going to look for a split second to pause. Because your opponent's used to you taking the shot early, they're looking for any piece of information they can get visually to start leaning to one side or the other. So if you go in to take the ball early and you just kind of sit there for a split second, you've already made your decision on what you're going to do, and then you take your ball and you go cross-quarter down the line, you'll notice that your opponent starts to have to guess what you're going to do with the ball, just because they can't really read the body language as much. Set yourself up kind of neutral though. Like obviously if I'm leaning this way, it's very obvious I'm going to try and go in that direction. We're going to kind of set up in an almost neutral position where we can shift our body weight one way or the other at the last second. And if you do that properly, you should see the result where you start wrong footing your opponent very often. So here's a couple of examples of that just on the teaching aspect of it, but then as you can see during the point play, it's going to be very effective. So just showing an example of the taking it early without pausing first. Everything else that I've covered is still the same. If you see me take it early without the pause, I just kind of shift my weight in. There's nothing wrong with only doing this version of it. You show up, direct the ball. Now, if I switch to the pause, again, it takes really solid timing, but what you'll notice is if I was playing against somebody, that little split second is all it takes for my opponent to have to guess before they see that ball. They actually have to sit for a second, so I've essentially cut off their footwork, and then right when they've wasted their split step, that's when I go. Because they are expecting, let me see the ball, they're expecting me to take it early, they'll split right there, and then move. Same thing, I'll take it early, they'll split, and then they'll see that. But if I can get them to waste their split step, by the time they read the ball, they've become flat-footed. And that's a very effective strategy, and it's not even really a strategy. You can hit the ball wherever you want, but when you apply this little technical change, it becomes very effective for wrong footing your opponent. You're going to hit way more what I call accidental winners. You were just going the direction you were going to go anyway, but your opponent has to lag for a second, and in that little split second they go, and then the ball goes there, and now they have to try to get the engine going again. Before we wrap up the video, here's an example of a player you guys might recognize doing exactly what I'm saying. If you look closely, you can see there's a pause, there's a taking the ball early, there's a very compact motion, and if you look at the body language of the player on the receiving end, they just can't seem to get their footing, even though the ball's not actually moving that much faster than what they're used to. The ball's actually being hit slower than the average pace, but because it's being taken early, hit relatively low and flat, you can see how off balance the player is. But that's going to wrap up the video, guys. I hope it was helpful. Like I said, this is something I feel like anybody can do. You can take pieces of it and apply it to whatever you're physically capable of or tactically capable of, but anybody can learn to take the ball early. Anybody can make their swing smaller. Anybody can pause. And if you combine these in the way that's most advantageous or effective for you, you'll be surprised how easy it is to be aggressive if you're not the what I call naturally big hitter. Everybody knows somebody that just seems to be able to generate pace out of nowhere from like the worst positions, and it takes almost no skill. And some of us actually have to work to hit those balls hard. But in this example, you don't need any of that stuff, and you can be just as aggressive and effective. Like I said, if you know anybody would benefit from this, send it off to them. But until then, I'll see you guys in the next one.